Thank you. I'm Ivan Savov. I'm chairman of the European Risk Policy Institute and fellow of the Australian Risk Policy Institute. Since 2009, we have been working on developing new thinking and promoting new thinking about risk, developing net-centric models, complex system models, where we are trying to promote and educate community and everyone about new solutions, as we are seeing that in the past years, the classical risk management models are failing. And I'm really glad to see that today we are all thinking in the same direction. We are all now looking quite differently from what we have been looking 10 years ago about risk, namely net-centric, complex system approach, preemptive thinking, anticipatory analysis, and so forth. So really glad. I think we're all moving in the right direction.
Me too. Thank you, Ivan. I haven't really introduced myself. Chris Beck. I'm the Chief Scientist and Vice President for Policy at EIS Council. What I really do is work for Lihi and Anna. But the outlook that we have at EIS Council is that in order to be resilient, we need to build the strongest community we can. And we see a tension, an unintentional tension developing between the green side and the resilient side. There's kind of the national security and the climate green resilient future sustainability folks. And we think that behind it, everything, they all really have the same goals. And if we meet, we learn each other's language, we identify those goals properly, that we can work together to solve these problems. That's why we're creating these working groups, et cetera. And thank you all for being here at this meeting. So to start that then, we're going to go back to the line in the room. I want, what I'm going to do is just pose a question to, we'll start with posing it to you, Yoav, but I think we can all comment on it. And then if there's audience comments on it, and then we'll move on to kind of the next thing. So I want to get kind of everybody involved in each question. So you said, or you noted climate change, Yoav, and you said it's driving more extreme weather events that we've seen before. What was once a 1 in 100 year event happens every decade. It would seem that our timescales are decreasing and our severe weather event impacts are increasing against a backdrop of ever-increasing average temperatures. So what are the implications of these new timescales, and what is the paradigm to think about climate-related impacts on all infrastructures?
Okay, so the slide that I presented, just a reminder of, I think, one single event where I've seen, based on the headlines of the British tabloids or newspapers, that the British are losing their cool. I mean, just read the headlines. And that was a unique, freak kind of a heat wave, but I think it's a sign of the times. As I said, climate change is here. It's not going to stop anytime soon. And there's this parallel discourse of who's going to compete in this race. We are running to go to a green grid, microgrids, and decarbonize our energy regime and go to net zero, while still pumping huge amounts of CO2 into the atmosphere, which means we are continuing to exacerbate the heat capacity, which is stored in the atmosphere. And, someone said physics. You cannot argue with physics. Mm-hmm. For any degree of Celsius that we increase global temperature, there are 7% more water vapor in the air. That's Clausius-Clapeyron equation, physics 101, cloud physics. So what does it mean to have more water vapor in the air? It means that when you have those cataclysmic events, like Hurricane Harvey that Avi said, Hurricane Harvey was just category 3, but it rained 1,500 millimeters in 36 hours on Houston. Okay? Now my colleagues are talking about category 6, which does not exist yet, and maybe should be introduced in the discussion and in the public discourse of what the future holds for us. We cannot imagine this. I mean, the UK had only single one event in 1987, I believe, of a really strong hurricane scale kind of system. But this happens sporadically everywhere in the world. especially during August, September, October, which are the height of the season. Look what happened in Asia just last week. Tropical storm Boris over Central Europe last week. We are getting inundated on a regular basis. How does this reflect on our resilience, preparedness? And those were once considered the storm of the century, those headlines. Once in a century event, they're becoming really frequent. And of course, we cannot put the numbers and say in the weather forecast, next week, a month from now, this place we're going to be hit. But on average, if you look at statistics, climate statistics, this increasing landscape increases our, should I say, vulnerability. As the EIS message from this conference is, we are all connected, we are all vulnerable, but some places are more vulnerable than others. And especially if you look at the Mediterranean basin, this is a climate change hotspot, and it's gonna get worse before it gets better. So I'd like to stop here and maybe revisit some of the topics, but certainly we are talking about all kinds of threat scenarios and adversaries from Russia and China, but in my mind, we are our own adversaries by not moving fast enough to, flatten the curve of CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere. We are already 50% higher than pre-industrial values. We are at 425 parts per million compared with 280, 19th century. And we're not going to stop unless this room comes with solutions.
So yeah, I was going to ask you to pick up on that, please. Sure, of course.
Another problem is that we have been constantly missing the results. We have been underestimating the speed with which climate changes and events become more frequent. The heat, the temperature is rising at a much faster level than it was projected. Even IPCC is now recognizing that actually what we're talking about as a limit for 2050 is already passed in 2023, 1.53 degrees. So we're underestimating the speed with which the climate crisis unfolds. And that actually trickles into the next topics that we will be discussing is if you are under-evaluating how the changes are happening, if you are using optimal risk scenarios instead of worst case scenarios, then you are introducing a lot of vulnerability to any projects that you are building in order to reach sustainability, to improve sustainability, projects related to photovoltaics, alternative energy, and so forth, because of looking at optimal scenarios. And that is something that we have to raise and communicate with the insurance industry, who is also using optimal scenarios instead of worst case scenarios, which are actually already reality. They're not hypothetical. And also the banking sector, who is investing and financing green projects. Because if you do not evaluate risk for resilience for these projects, you're making a big mistake and introducing a lot of vulnerability because of not evaluating what is really happening. And that is also driven by politicians who don't like, as we said, there is also a psychological point. People don't like to hear bad news. So yeah, let's project on the optimal level. And I think that's a grave mistake right now everyone is doing.
Thank you.
Let me just,
yes,
one comment. I'm not sure that planning for the worst case scenario is the right approach, because it means a waste of a lot of resources. I think that you need to do a kind of optimization, taking into account also the worst case scenario, but the main target is to plan vis-a-vis, let's say, the most usual behavior of the network or of the people.
Can I add a comment
yeah.
about planning for the worst case scenario? In my former life, I was the project manager for the first Israeli astronaut mission back in 1998, who flew on the Space Shuttle Columbia, NASA, US disaster, remember, on February 1st, 2003. And we trained for 5 years for that mission. And at NASA, You train for various scenarios and you run simulations. They do what they call JIS. It's a joint integrated simulation with all components of the mission take part, astronauts, controllers, scientists, and we never prepared. So we prepared for many, many scenarios. Some were inconceivable in my mind. Maybe I was naive. I said, no, that's a low probability, so that will never happen. But what actually happened in reality was much worse than was in the playbook, because it was an out-of-the-box or worst-case scenario that nobody even contemplated can occur. My sentiment is that we should have those worst-case scenarios in mind, if not build for them, but at least not be surprised by them. And we have some maybe red pages in the playbook said, opening case off.
Yeah,
such a scenario occurs.
Yeah. Right. Well, that's what EIS calls it. That's the black sky thinking versus the gray sky versus the blue sky, which is when everything works. And the way you put that, Amos, was it captures the challenge, right? Right there is why it's hard to make resilience investments, because if that worst case scenario never happens, then what you did was wasted effort. But it won't feel like wasted effort if that bad thing happens, right? So when is it wise and prudent to make the investment in that kind of future planning for those scenarios? And that's the thing we're all struggling
actually,
with.
This is a very difficult question.
Yeah.
And actually, my name is Amos, but I'm not a prophet. So I don't, I can't tell you what will happen. I think that it's a matter of probabilities. I mean, I give an example from a scandal that was in my country, in Israel, a few weeks ago. One of the top managers of the energy governmental companies said that actually the Israeli network is not prepared for any disastrous case, and we can be in 3 days without an energy, and the whole country will collapse. Well, there was a big scandal, of course, and let's skip the yellow aspect of this. But then the question is, it's like, you know what, it's like earthquake. There is probability there will be earthquake in a certain degree, but you are not planning for the most severe earthquake. You do a probability, maybe the worst earthquake is with 5% or 10% or whatever. You take the main probability, and you do take all the action and all the precaution in order to solve this issue. So the same here. Again, it's a matter of optimization. We have the vertical network, and we have the distributed network. Today, they have to go together because there is no one solution that will provide you with 100% security. So you need to do in each point of time, you need to learn and to understand, do the statistics, do the mathematics. Again, it's not only mathematics, it's also your experience and previous experience and the know-how that you have about how the system will develop, how the climate change will or will not continue, and based on this, do your calculation and do your decisions.
Thank you. Any audience reaction?
Question in
this
the
guy
audience.
right here, right? Leahy, this guy in the blue sweater. He's been trying to ask a question every panel.
Yeah.
What is your name, the guy in the blue sweater?
I promised him at lunch that he'd get in one of these times.
Gordon Wiley from Green Energy Sustainable Solutions. I've mentioned that the elephant in the room is actually climate change. I think the elephant in the room is different from climate change. I think the elephant in the room is the trade-off, and most people assume there's a trade-off between having a resilient, green energy system and economic growth. And I think it's possible to have both. I've done some modeling on this, I think demonstrated. But as far as I can see, nobody in the world seems to be bothered about demonstrating optimize both economic growth and addressing climate change with a resilient energy system. So I think until the world recognizes this is misinformation, that people on the argument against the green grid are saying we want economic growth, persist with fossil fuels or whatever solution. But this, to my mind, is the elephant in the room, which nobody seems to mention. And I think it is an addressable issue with the right education.
Yoav, you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, okay. So it's a matter of what are you willing to pay to keep on doing what you've been doing in this slow transition to ensure that you still have economic growth. But there's a tangent philosophy. Well, obviously the markets don't do that yet.
No, they don't, but I think
maybe that's the direction we should be going, but or else, I mean, as a tangent philosophy, zero growth. We don't need to grow anymore. Stop growth. Yeah. Okay.
Have you guys, how do you, Amos and Ivan, think about that? Is it a trade-off? Is it possible to grow, kind of maximize both things, or do you have to, is it a balance between the two? Do you have to back off one to increase the other?
It's multifaceted. It's not only about balancing for economic growth or no growth and achieving net zero, but we have other considerations. This summer, we have been doing research exactly on that trade-off between sustainability and resilience. And what we find out in Europe in a number of situations is that there is additional vulnerabilities and risks introduced through the green projects because these projects are not executed correctly from the point of view of assessing the risks and how to develop in a robust way. So that's what I was saying, that they have undervalued the risks related to the increased speed of climate change. So they are not designed, by design, they introduce additional risk to be prone to extreme weather. So for instance, they're saying, okay, we will have mega storms with 250 kilometers per hour in Europe in 2050, while the other model, which I say the extreme model, the conservative model, is saying it will be 2030, so 20 years earlier. And this is already happening. The Central European, the storms that are happening, jumping from North America, and we have done it even with the black sky simulations. This has been coming to Europe, and they have lifted up in the air thousands of hectares of photovoltaics because they were designed and installed with a projection of 60 kilometers per hour maximum winds, while we were getting hit on a monthly basis with 120, 150. So this is what I'm saying. Hail. Hail is not anymore 2 centimeters, it's 400 grams, half a kilo. So that is not coming into consideration. Banks are closing their eyes and financing without evaluating the additional risk introduced. So what we're saying, we must consider that aspect as well. As we're building this technology to counter emissions and mitigate climate change, we have to be very careful as we introduce this technology to be resilient and robust enough to withstand the rapid changes. And the other thing is, states are forcing plants that are using fossil fuel to change their installations irreversibly to burn, let's say, biomass, a sustainable biomass.
Well, did you say irreversibly or reversibly?
Irreversibly. Okay. So in a time of a crisis, if we're getting, let's say, a megastorm that will hit all the photovoltaics, the wind turbines, we cannot go back to fossil because we have shut it down. So that's another consideration. We have to look at that balance. So it's an economic balance. It's a balance from a risk point of view, resilience of the state, of the grid resilience, and also there are the social aspects of societal resilience and so forth. So it's not a straightforward problem the way it is put by, for instance, European regulations, where they're saying, we are giving you 1 trillion, build green projects and get the money. And just one more point for a second. We also have to keep in mind that 1 trillion has attracted the attention of transnational organized crime. And that's another big issue because when they win a project for 100 million for infrastructure, building an infrastructure, make sure that will not be built according to standards. So that's another layer. So it's really multi-layered, multifaceted, and we have to look in a holistic way to say, let's step back, look at the whole, and balance our approach when we move forward with any project.
Anna, I see a question there in the back. While you're making your way up there, Amos, please go
No,
ahead.
I just want one comment to the question that you presented to us. I see it a bit different. I mean, the first rule of economics is that there is no free lunch. So if we now invest everything in risk and we abandon growth, it will affect other aspects of our life. So maybe I'm saying something which is not in line with EIS here, but maybe you have to take the chance that there are a certain risk that you are not covered, and maybe it will happen. But you cannot do everything just on one line. You need to do optimization.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, please, go ahead.
Just to add on, so we're missing a couple of critical data points.
Oh, by the way, can you tell us who you are and where you're from?
Shari Griven from a small consulting firm. I work in the States on resilience and reliability and security. That's enough about me. The data, we're missing some critical data points. So the investment could be there. The challenge is that there isn't good modeling data, in that the risk modeling is based on legacy modeling for critical infrastructure, and that legacy modeling does not account for the climate change risks you were just talking about. So if you bring in the right data points, the investment could be there. Second, it ignores the increasing and exacerbated risk to legacy that as we have not modeled in the impact to legacy infrastructure. We've got to upgrade all of that anyway if we're going to maintain legacy infrastructure. So all of that could be done, and then both would drive. And you raised a great point about the funding. When the funding comes in, it has to be managed and regulated effectively to ensure that we transition. And then a final point you noted, it's not modeled. So the infrastructure that we've seen built so far on the green energy side, a lot of it was built by investment bankers and funds, not by the power or the water or the critical infrastructure themselves. So in the green energy, the power sector, investment bankers and funds don't understand safe, reliable, secure, cost-effective service, and they don't live to that, but they're starting to pay attention to and get that. That has to be integrated as part of the requirement for the funding. Yeah. So basically, you can't be the grid of the future and also proclaim you don't have to be critical infrastructure and treat it like it.
Yeah.
Ivan, you want to talk about that? Or go back to the dealing with the legacy infrastructure? How do we bridge that gap? Or is it?
There was a question there, or
It's more a comment.
That was a lot of points.
Yeah, but let me pick up on the effects of climate change on infrastructures, not only on the new ones being built, but we can see a rapid pace of erosion of existing infrastructures. Like if you've seen bridges, highways, train tracks, runways in airports are all being degraded, not only by single catastrophic events, one in a decade storm, but on a regular pace of just being exposed to the daily temperature cycle, which goes ever stronger. And I've seen images of highways in Texas from last summer, where the heat was so severe that it actually melted some of the highways. And that occurs in any major area exposed to extreme temperature. As I said, the Middle East and the Gulf states are particularly vulnerable to huge heat waves and high temperatures, and that will erode the existing infrastructure, let alone if we don't consider this in planning for the new infrastructures we build, we are exposing ourselves to additional threats and risks.
Absolutely. Yeah, go ahead. It'll come on.
You sure?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. I have a question about education and climate change, because for me, I've been working on this area for a while now, but climate change talks to everyone. My kids understand climate change. It's a very hot topic these days. How do you use the momentum? I mean, we're sitting here, which is great, but how do we use the momentum to reach people in a faster way?
Well, as Lord Albatross said this morning, gloom and doom is not the way to do it. So sorry for putting the slide and for kind of,
Unfortunately, it's the reality.
Yeah, that's the reality, but it's too harsh to handle. And already we note in certain studies the phenomenon that is called green fatigue or climate anguish, that people just don't want to hear about it anymore. It's too much. And to be honest, Lihi, I don't have the answer how to do it. I have some ideas. Maybe work group media or work group education can benefit from those ideas. But I think we are past the stage of having to explain what climate change is all about, and fighting climate deniers and conspiracy theorists that it does not exist, that it's the sun, it's the cosmic rays, it's something else. It's not us. It's like a kid breaking a toy and saying, no, it's not me. Of course it's you, and here's what's going to happen. And I don't know how to sugarcoat it, to be honest. I mean, it's not going to be easy. In physics, you teach conservation laws, right? Conservation of momentum, conservation of energy. There's no conservation of human misery, I'm afraid. And if we don't do things fast and effectively now, human misery is like entropy. It will only increase with times. There will be more humans. It will be hotter. It will be harder for more people on this planet. Sorry.
Hope and
We are
joy.
doomed.
Hope and joy, everybody.
Hope and joy.
Amos.
No, I just want one comment, 1 minute, one comment, okay? I just want to say that it's a matter of education. I mean, if you start from the first grade, then in 10, 15 years from now, this will be the standard of all the young people. You don't have then to do anything because they will be grown up to this. So the answer is the proper education.
Ivan, last word?
Yeah, last word. I recently read a very interesting report that it is observed now that our kids, even in schools, are looking at us and blaming us for not acting on time, that we have not done enough to save Earth, to reverse climate change. So I think they will have the initiative. Unfortunately, we failed, but they're pushing us right now, and we passed the tipping point. The initiative is in their hands. They're pushing us now to act fast. And just one last word to say is that we need really to evaluate by how many years we have missed the projection of the speed of climate change. If we missed it by 50 years, as was discussed back in 2019 in a big paper by the Australian Institute, if we had done that, we may need on a global scale urgently reevaluate our priorities and talk about not as a first priority investment in green projects and turning around and slowing down climate change because it is right now knocking on the door, the crisis, but rather it's a matter of green versus resilience. And maybe the global priority should be resilience on the first place because we're very close to doomsday.
Right.
That's my optimistic view.
It's more of a global. Yeah, that is. On a note of optimism, thank you. I want to say we got a bit of an organic plug there for the working group. So this one maybe on education. Again, see Paul Williams or myself during any of the breaks, which we're going to take right now. So let's take 10 minutes. 10 minutes. We'll go coffee up, and we'll be back for the final afternoon sessions. Thank you. Thanks, panel.
What we see in the future within the next 10 years or so is a resource adequacy gap. And what that means is not necessarily having the amount of capacity or resources on the grid to cover the needs and operate the grid.
At the same time that we're adopting wind and solar, transforming the grid in terms of digitization and the increasing penetration of electronic controls, we have the adversary ready to exploit that transition.
Everybody thinks about investing in terms of the ROI, return on investment, how much dollars you can make. We need to think in terms of how much you're going to lose if you do not invest in resilience.
Like to reintroduce someone you met this morning. Dr. Wells from the chief scientist for NATO is going to give our afternoon keynote, and followed by that, we'll have a panel led by Udi Ganani on measuring resilience. Please, Dr. Wells.
Thank you very much indeed for that introduction, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to deliver this keynote on NATO, science and technology and resilience. This slide summarizes what I would like to cover today. First, I'll give a very brief introduction to the NATO Science and Technology Organization, commonly known as the STO. Then I'll turn to how NATO approaches resilience. And finally, I'll give just a few examples of the work of the Science and Technology Organization and how it supports NATO's and the nation's resilience efforts, just surfing the waves of what we do. So let me give a quick overview of the NATO Science and Technology Organization. We have three executive bodies. The Office of the Chief Scientist is based in Brussels in the headquarters and supports me in my two roles as NATO Chief Scientist and Chair of the NATO Science and Technology Board. The Collaboration Support Office supports a collaborative programme of work, which I'll explain in a moment. It is 50 staff based in Paris. My own office is about 15 staff. Finally, the Centre for Maritime Research and Experimentation is based in La Spezia in Italy, and it comprises about 150 scientists. I'll add some colour to the roles of all three bodies in the next few slides. Turning first to the collaborative programme of work that is run out of Paris. At any one time, we have about 400 research projects underway. This corresponds to a monetary value of some 400 million euros per year. This is not NATO funding, it's not my funding, I wish it was, but it's individually paid for by those nations that participate in the individual projects. So if your nation is participating in a project, your nation will pay, essentially for your time. The bar chart here shows the number of activities undertaken on NATO's emerging and disruptive technologies over the last 6 years. The Centre for Maritime Research and Experimentation is NATO's own laboratory. It has a turnover of about £35 million per year, and it's a recognised global centre for maritime autonomous systems. It has state-of-the-art research facilities, including 2 research vessels shown here. The largest of these is ice-capable, and it does operate in the High North. The Centre undertakes research on maritime climate change and on critical underwater infrastructure. Turning very quickly to its work on climate change, every year it deploys into the High North, and it is doing research on the impact of the North Atlantic of the melting of the Greenland ice cap. As the ice cap melts, clearly the temperature of the surrounding water changes, as does its salt content. I should also say that the Centre has recently opened NATO's first quantum laboratory and continues work in underwater quantum navigation to enable future maritime operation resilience. The Office of the Chief Scientist supports me, as I say, in my twin roles of providing scientific advice to NATO leadership and chairing the NATO Science and Technology Board. 2 examples of our products are shown here. On the very left-hand side is a summary of the science we have undertaken to integrate women into the armed forces. This covers not only issues such as physical protection, but also some of the sociological aspects of integration of women into combat forces. The centre and right-hand publications show our Technology Trends 2023 to 2043, which was a look at emerging and disruptive technologies, how we judge that they will evolve scientifically over 20 years, and what the implication for NATO forces will be, and to the extent that we could, in a public document, what the impact for our strategic competitors and potential adversaries will also be. You can access these reports on the STOW webpage. They are deliberately public release. So I'll turn now to NATO's overall approach on resilience. The principles of NATO resilience is rooted in Article 3 of the North Atlantic Treaty, signed in Washington exactly 75 years ago. This states that the nations, separately and jointly, will maintain and develop their individual and collective capacity to resist armed attack. So resilience is both a national responsibility and a collective commitment. Each ally needs to be sufficiently prepared and adaptable to deal with the entire spectrum of crises envisaged by the alliance. At the same time, this individual commitment of every ally to maintain and strengthen its resilience reduces the vulnerability of NATO as a whole. Military efforts to defend NATO territory and populations need to be complemented by robust civil preparedness. This civil preparedness has 3 core functions: the continuity of government, continuity of essential services to the population, and military and civil support to military operations. These specifications have been translated into 7 baseline requirements for national resilience. These 7 baseline requirements were set out in the 2016 NATO summit at Warsaw. The Warsaw Summit recognises that NATO now faces a broader and evolving range of military and non-military security challenges. And being resilient against these challenges requires allies to maintain and protect critical civilian capabilities alongside the traditional military capabilities, and to work across the whole of government and with the private sector. It also requires the alliance to continue to engage with international bodies, particularly in the case of NATO, the European Union, and also with non-ally NATO partners. The baseline requirements cover, as you can see, the protection of populations and territory by strengthening continuity of government, the continuity of essential services, and security of critical civilian infrastructure. and NATO will work to ensure that our national and NATO military forces can at all times be adequately supported by civilian resources, including energy, transportation, and communications. We will also continue to prepare for, deter, and defend attacks that employ chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear material. The NATO warfighting capstone concept, approved in 2021 and subsequently made public in a redacted version, provides 5 warfare development imperatives to focus efforts. One of these is layered resilience: military, civil military, and military civilian. Turning to this year's Washington summit, which I attended, this includes a pledge to build on NATO's ongoing efforts to strengthen national resilience by integrating civilian planning into national and collective defense planning in peace, crisis, and conflict. With that, I shall highlight specific research that maps onto the 7 baseline requirements. In other words, the work of the NATO Science and Technology Organization and how that supports the 7 baseline requirements of the Alliance. Under assured continuity of governance, a research group has been established on defending democracy. This started in October 2022 with a launch meeting in Sweden. It is looking at how digital technology affects disinformation attacks, which erode public consensus around facts and government action. It is also looking at how the defense research can contribute to whole of government efforts. We are also undertaking significant work on disinformation. For example, as a result of early work on COVID-19, the Science and Technology Organization published a book last year on COVID-19 and disinformation. The foreword of this book was signed by the Deputy Secretary General. We have done much research on resilient energy supplies. I will just look at the first example shown here. The first example collected and shared best practice for enhancing energy efficiency in operational settings, such as base camps, ships, and wearables. So nations were able to share their best practice science with each other so that they could all learn from each other. Regarding the uncontrolled movement of people, we have recently started a project looking at how mass movements of people can be modelled. And on resilient food and water resources, our 1-year study on human security explicitly covered the science and technology relating to these topics. This was an exploratory team where the outcome was to define a formal 3-year research project. Our significant work on climate change also supports this baseline requirement. We have a very considerable amount of work on dealing with mass casualties and disruptive health crises. Just a few highlights are shown here. Our long-term scientific study on CBRN defence was a 5-year study which provided the scientific underpinning of NATO's CBRN defence policy, which was launched in 2022 at the Madrid summit. We have also undertaken much research on the use of education and training of CBRN defence using computer simulations and AI-based instructors. In resilient communications, we are investigating the implications of 5G and 6G on NATO operations. On resilient civil transportation systems, I will highlight the work of the Centre for Maritime Research and Experimentation on anomalous shipping movements. I'm sure we all recall the grounding of the Ever Given in March 2021. It blocked the Suez Canal for 6 days, holding up global trade at an estimated value of nearly $10 billion each day. The centre subsequently analysed the vessel's track and found that anomalies in its position could be detected a full 19 minutes before it ran aground. Although this analysis was done after the event, from a technical perspective, it could be implemented to operate a real-time tracking data to assist port and canal authorities in their situational awareness. To allow exploitation of this research, the Centre has published its work in a peer review academic journal, and the computer codes are available as well. Finally, I should mention two strategic activities that support the S&T contributions to resilience capabilities. The first is a deep dive into our overall collaborative S&T work on resilience. This will look at our current and recently completed work on resilience, identify the gaps, and work through the best way of addressing these gaps. This work is led by Finland, and a workshop will be held there in December of this year to take this work forward. The second is our publication next year of S&T Trends 2025 to 2045. This will be published, as I say, next year, and will look at how technologies will evolve over the coming 20 years and the military consequences of that evolution. Given that, as I said earlier, the NATO warfare development capstone concept has identified layered resilience as one of the 5 warfare development imperatives, then this document will address how the S&T that supports resilience will evolve over this time period in the military context as well. So, in conclusion, I hope I've given you an overview of the NATO Science and Technology Organization, the approach that NATO as a whole has taken to resilience, and the research that the NATO Science and Technology Organization undertakes that maps onto the resilience baseline requirements. Thank you very much for your attention. If you want to explore these issues further with me, you can see my email address up there. I'd be very happy to take that forward. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wells. I want to recommend folks do follow up with him, and I'd like to now invite the panel 6. That's Udi, Liz, Rick, and Igor, please. Can you start?
Yeah.
No, he wants to. I'll move it when you're ready.
Just to the mic, please. Okay. You sit there. Okay, I'll grab that mic.
Yes? Sure. Okay, first I'd like to introduce my esteemed panel members. Their CVs are all in the package. So first, Professor Liz Varga has a chair in complex systems in the Civil, Environmental and Geometric Engineering Department, University College, London. Rick Cadworth is the board and executive director at Resilience First, a not-for-profit organization founded in 2018 with more than 600 member and subscriber organizations. And Dr. Igor Linkov is a senior science and technology manager with the US Army Engineer Research and Development Center, ERDEC, an adjunct professor with University of Florida and Carnegie Mellon University. And I'm Udi Ganani. I joined the AVI 12 years ago. I was the number 3 employee at EIS Council, and here we are today. My title is Strategic Programs, and one of the strategic programs was association with Professor Washington and what's happening here. Following the footsteps of Dr. Stockton and being in an academic environment, I would like to start with measuring resilience 101. As an engineer, I like that session very much because as an engineer, I know that if you don't measure, you cannot improve. The first thing I think is past us. I mean, resilience, I think we've got plenty of definitions and we'll not get to that. And I will start right away. The first person to identify the need for measurement was Peter Drucker in a publication, The Practice of Management, back in 1954, that said what gets measured gets managed. Basic. Measuring resilience involves assessing how well an individual, community, or a nation can withstand, adapt to, and recover from adversity or stress. Resilience is a multidimensional and varies based on the context, so the metrics differ for personal, community, and national levels. Our session will focus mostly on the community and national aspects of resilience, with strong emphasis on critical infrastructures. And I have to applaud everyone who is still here. You have showed an excellent personal resilience so far. The community resilience is the capacity to prepare for, respond, and recover from natural disasters and economic shocks. It can be assessed using a combination of societal, economic, and infrastructure indicators. When we measure community resilience, we're looking at social indicators, such as social capital measured by the strengths of community networks and trust. We're measuring community cohesion, measures of unity and cooperation. There are economic indicators, economic diversity, unemployment rates or employment rates, and the resources availability. There are obviously the infrastructural indicators, critical infrastructure robustness, housing stability, and emergency preparedness. Last but not least, environmental indicators, sustainability practices, how well the community manages and protects its natural resources, and risk management strategies for mitigating environmental risks like floods or fires. National resilience refers to a country's overall capacity to withstand and recover from large-scale crises, whether they are economic, social, environmental, or geopolitical. Measurement involves a broader range of indicators, including governance, economic stability, and social cohesion. How to measure national resilience? Governance indicators like political stability, law and order, and corruption levels. Economic indicators, economic resilience indicator known as ERI, debt level and diversification of the economy. Social indicators such as social cohesion, health system resilience, education and literacy. Security and defense indicators, national defense capability, cybersecurity readiness, and diplomatic strengths. And again, environmental and infrastructural indicators, environmental sustainability, critical infrastructure, and disaster preparedness. And the last, which EIS Council is blamed for focusing on infrastructure, I think we've demonstrated so far that it is part of the agenda, but not all of it. Infrastructural resilience is a critical component of overall resilience at both the community and the national levels. It refers to the capacity of physical systems, such as transportation, utilities, communication networks, and buildings, to withstand, adapt to, and recover from disruptive events. When infrastructure is resilient, it not only survives shocks, but also helps support and speed up recovery efforts. Okay, so I would like to pose the first question to Igor. Igor, stress testing offers a conceptual framework and methodology for identifying risks associated with cascading failures and selecting mitigation and recovery strategies. In your paper, you have reviewed the fundamentals of stress testing, science, and practices in different fields, such as medicine, engineering, economics, and identifies challenges associated with the application of existing methodologies to infrastructure systems. Please walk us through the applicability of stress testing to measuring resilience of critical infrastructure systems.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me start from a little bit afar, because I guess I'm first, so I need to set up the stage. So how we measure? Well, we have metrics-based approaches and we have model-based approaches. What we just heard is basically metrics-based approach. We have all kinds of indicators of how well system performs in economics, social, and we have metrics. How many people communicate to each other, how many buildings are there, how many energy generators they have in basements, right? So this is all metrics that can be connected to resilience. The challenge with metrics-based approaches is how to select right metrics and how to connect them. And moreover, how to differentiate risk assessment and management from resilience analytics, right? Because risk is the product of threat, something coming outside of the system, vulnerability, property of your system, and consequences, that the results of threat acting on specific vulnerability resulting in damages. While resilience, again, we had like already 100 definitions of resilience in one day, but I really like what was said just a minute ago. In 50s and then in 2011 by National Academy of Science and in executive orders of Obama, Trump, and Biden administration, resilience is defined as ability to withstand, absorb, recover, and adapt, right? And moreover, NATO requested all partner nations develop national resilience strategies. And I was part of US committee drafting national resilience strategy that should be released any day now. They have been telling me since June, but hopefully it will be released. And the definition is very similar. National ability, US, I think it's almost exactly written there, that US defined resilience as national ability to recover, absorb, recover, adapt, and withstand. So that's the definition. The challenge is how you balance risk versus resilience, ability to absorb and withstand, which is risk part, versus recover and adapt. So back to the question. The network nature of resilience is actually a model-based approach, right? In metrics, you have all these disparate metrics, but in model-based approaches, you look at resilience as interconnected networks. And for me, resilience, no matter how we call it, the difference between resilience and risk is ability to use network science in resilience versus probabilistic risk assessment and risk assessment, right? And if we agree on that, then we will have mathematical framing of resilience and something that we can all rely on in resilience analytics. Now, the question was about resilience stress testing. And Liz and I worked for United Nations Disaster Risk Reduction Office, and they asked me to develop framework for resilience stress testing for infrastructure about 3 or 4 years ago. And at the same time, Liz was asked to develop a principle of resilience for infrastructure. So I obviously start to look at historical precedent, what is stress testing, and how we use stress testing to measure ability of your heart to withstand extra stress. You put yourself on treadmill and you run, and doctors monitor your heart activities. And once you start to experience stress, at that point, you see how your heart works and what are the indication of disasters, right? So in medicine, resilience stress testing use metrics-based. They measure shape of signals and all that. It's all metrics-based. And we can connect all the metrics that you set in stress testing. And the idea of stress testing in metrics-based approaches would be to see how change in one metrics would result in change in system resilience. You basically have this humongous weighted sum, and you can see how weights and value of metrics will change this integrated measure of resilience, right? In model-based approaches to stress testing, it's where you need advanced math. You represent a system as interconnected networks, and this is what I was able to introduce to National Resilience Strategy, this idea that it's interconnectedness of the networks. And then what you measure is ability to network to recover from disruptions. Not only you measure change in integrated measure of resilience, but rather you see dynamic and temporal profiles of how a system can recover. And that's what you can do through infrastructure stress testing. If your ship gets stuck in Suez Canal, Tesla closed operation in Germany because they cannot deliver parts, right? So this can be done through resilience stress testing as in networks. So I guess it took me much longer than probably you expected, but I will stop here.
Hey, our schedule is broken already, so don't feel bad about elaborating. Rick, you're currently leading the revision of international standard for ISO 22316, which is focused on 5 dimensions of an organization: finance, operations, workforce, environment, and social, defining resilience outcomes and setting resilience measures, and the use of stress testing and digital models. Please share with us your key findings, especially around the new model for organizational resilience, which you co-developed with Cranfield School of Management.
Yeah, let me just perhaps go back one step. And in my role with Resilience First, one of the challenges I hear organizations and businesses generally say, and it comes back to, I think, the point you made actually earlier from Peter Drucker, is if we can't measure it, we can't manage it. And the challenges a lot of organizations have faced with resilience so far has been, we don't have a way of measuring our resilience, not very effectively. What we have are capabilities models and maturity levels, but they're good in their own right, but they're not taking us to where we really need to be. So I've been looking at it in terms of, okay, what can we do to improve the measurement capabilities for businesses? What's the model we can produce? And the work I've been doing with Cranfield School of Management dovetails with some of the work I'm doing as the lead author for the international standard on organizational resilience. So we're going through a major revision of that standard at the moment. The first thing, just to point out, the international standards world is about trying to get a sort of common language and a common understanding around a subject. So when we talk about organizational resilience, we're trying to make sure we're getting a common language, a common understanding, but we're also putting in place actually practical mechanisms that organizations can use to improve their resilience. That's what we're trying to achieve. Coming back to definitions, and there's been a lot of them, what I do here is actually there's an increasing convergence on definitions. The same terms keep coming up. In the international standard, the definition for organizational resilience is the ability to absorb and adapt to a changing environment. So it's short, it's simple, but it's using those 2 words, absorb and adapt. And absorb, by that we mean everything that encompasses being able to withstand, being able to cope with, being able to recover from, being able to respond to. That is the absorption piece. Okay, so it's a wide use of the term. If I come to the model, I'll give you a bit of a preview of what we're talking about. We haven't announced it yet. We haven't launched it yet. It's going to come out sort of mid to late October, and we'll give the sort of fuller details of it then. It's actually on a 2 to 3 year program, so there'll be increasing content that comes behind it. But when you look at an organization, it's based around the 5 capitals model that's already out there. So as you say, it's finance, it's operations, it's workforce, it's environment, and it's social. So you're looking at those 5 dimensions in terms of what an organization needs to consider for resilience. And with each of those dimensions, it's taking organizations to look at what is it within these dimensions that really matter in terms of being resilient for our organization. Because not everything does. So it's trying to make sure that we focus on what matters. And then what it does is says for each of those resilience outcomes that we're trying to achieve, what are the indicators we can use to measure resilience? What are the targets we can set? So it's got those layers, and that forms the core of the model. Okay? Around the outside of the model, is the context in which the organization sits. So that's the sort of real world environment that this organization sits in. And you can think of, if you look at the World Economic Forum, for example, the strategic threats or forces they set out, changing demographics, climate change, technology acceleration, and those sorts of forces that are coming in. Within that outer layer of the context is then the concept of both real world events, but stress testing. So coming onto your model that you said with the indicators is now stress testing of that. Very much as you were talking about on the medical and the heart thing. If you stress test against that model, you can determine whether you can stay within your resilience indicators. That's the concept. And if you can't, then you can adjust or adapt accordingly. So that's the basic thinking behind the model we're talking about. And I think it'll be a significant step change for organizations to provide those ways of measures. And it's not entirely new. This is not entirely new. We looked at evidence of where this is working. And we've got Paul here. I know all the great work, Paul, you've done in the financial system. But if we go back to the financial crisis and look at what the financial sector did to improve their financial resilience, it was primarily about setting, effectively, targets, liquidity ratios, capital adequacy, and then stress testing on a regular basis. And guess what? They're now applying a very similar approach to operational resilience. Decide what matters in terms of the services we provide, set thresholds, and then effectively scenario and stress test against those thresholds. So it's a key way of actually starting to improve in a practical way some of the organizational resilience.
Thank you, Rick. Liz, your definition of infrastructure resilience is broader than the capacity of physical systems. It is also about people, cyber, digital, and the consequences of failure for the economy, environment, and society. It is also about the whole life cycle of infrastructure. As an example, when a coal plant is decommissioned, national infrastructure becomes less resilient. Please introduce us to the latest version of the ISO 22372, which you are leading.
Okay, thank you very much, and thanks for inviting me to this talk. It's a pleasure to be here. So ISO 22372, which should be launched next year, is in the its committee draft stage. It should soon be going into draft international standards, so it should be available widely during the autumn. The standard builds on the United Nations work we did that Ivo mentioned on the principles for resilient infrastructure. That was published in 2022, and that is already online and available. What's interesting is in 2023, we followed up that report with guidelines for principles for national infrastructure, and that included metrics for resilience. Now, the principles are, there are 6 principles in both the UNDRR work, and they've sustained throughout this new ISO standard. Now, they are broken down into around 30 to 40 key actions, about the same number for each of the principles. Now, what we introduced in the guidelines were metrics for resilience. We were quite keen on having quantitative metrics. And now what we found was actually the data was not available. Either it was not current, it was incomplete, it was just not being collected on some things. So we ended up with qualitative metrics. So you could score yourself something like 0 if you were doing nothing at all on a key action. And so one of the key actions was in fact stress testing. So if you were doing no stress testing, you scored 0 on that key action. If you were doing stress testing frequently, reporting on it, using a standard, then you could score yourself 5. So it was a way for organizations to evaluate themselves. Now, what's important about this work is that it's actually multi-organization. So infrastructure straddles multiple organizations. Infrastructure delivers critical services. And we've seen already that data centers are now critical services. So infrastructure includes all of these. So it's not just the traditional transport, energy, water, waste, and telecoms networks. It actually now includes finance, data centers, and a whole host of other activities which are critical to the community. So the principles that we devised, and I think these will resonate with the talks we've had already today. So there are 6. The first one is about accountability. So governance is essential for infrastructure. You need to know who is responsible for what, who is doing what, under which circumstances. The second principle is about being proactive. We've spent too long recovering and being very good at firefighting. We know how to do that. Actually, we're not very good at designing for resilience or finding the investment for putting resilience into our solutions so that they are more robust. The third one is about environmental integration. We have to work with nature-based solutions. We have to be sustainable. We have to reduce materials use. So any solution we create has got to be resilient with the environment. The next one is on society. We have to work with our users, with our the demand loads that we have for infrastructure. Now, that also means that we have to engage society with those solutions. And things like avoiding how should we say it, theft from infrastructure. So copper is often stolen from transport networks. They create a lot of disruption. So how can we engage society so that they understand the value of it and actually be part of the solution? So I've now got, so that's 4 principles. The 5th principle is about, and I'm going to forget now, so I didn't bring my notes with me. So the 5th principle is about continuously learning. So we need to constantly monitor and increasingly collect data and have much more up-to-date information. We need to refine our assumptions and make those much more transparent. So the whole era of digital twins is becoming much more relevant. So the digital modeling we can do based on the current contemporary methods we have, and using data science, of course, is much more important. And then the last one is about, this is I'm going to really struggle, someone can help me. Tom, can you remember which one it is? What's the last one I've missed out? I'm glad I'm not the only one that will forget. It's really important as well. Have I mentioned 6 already? Maybe I've covered them all already. That's why I can't think of what the next one is. But yeah, so it's principles-based. And we found that was the most convenient way for people to be able to work together across multiple organizations to come and share values about resilience. So I think I've said enough for now.
Thank you, Liz. I'm going to pose a question. Not all 3 of you should answer at least one. And this question talks about the complexity of our world, how the failure of one system, for instance, power grid, can cascade into others, healthcare, transportation, and how we can develop measurement tools that capture the complexity of these interdependencies. And the question is, how do we account for the interdependency between different critical infrastructures when assessing national resilience?
Yeah, so maybe I will try. Basically, the way we propose it for United Nations and the way we implement it in many projects, including large projects that we have on community resilience within watersheds, the Army Corps projects. If you have multiple layers, you have energy layer, social layer, infrastructure layer, they're all connected, right? You know, energy, fuel, cyber control, physical, and if something fails, it cascades across all that. So you can model that through digital twin explicitly. You can have simplified versions of that, but it's absolutely crucial. And for me, that's differentiating from resilience and risk, because in risk, we try to find the component that is going to fail, and we harden it, then we try to find another component, and we harden it. So then we run out of money, and then this cascading failure happens, and that's exactly what is happening now. So there are tools of network science that are available to model that, and through stress testing, we can break links and nodes, change properties, and see how this cascade happens. And then through this cascade modeling, we can identify a pathway for recovery. And through this pathway, we can really achieve resilience that is maybe threat agnostic, not in response to one specific threat scenario, but rather pathway for recovery that may be multiple threats or threat agnostic?
Just to add as well, I think in the organizational resilience model I talk about, it's also very much about connected impacts and cascading failures. So within the organization itself, the reason we have the 5 dimensions is actually to say, look, you may have an impact which hits primarily one dimension initially, but it will inevitably cascade or connect to the other dimensions. So a significant operational failure will have financial implications, will have social implications, et cetera. So these are things that are connected. The second thing we talk about in the model is about the organization sits in a context. So it has to take a whole of system and a whole of society approach. And that means it needs to understand what it's dependent on and what it's connected to. And I think ultimately, it's a long way to go for organizations yet to get to full digital modeling type capabilities. But the concept of stress testing for organizations is exactly the same. It is not about doing an exercise and running crisis exercise. It's a deep analytical process to go through to really understand how something fails, what the consequences of that are, and what your resilience methods are that support this and challenge every assumption. The world of modeling and digital twins ultimately will come into this, I'm sure.
Just a very quick example. So we did some work for Cabinet Office a few years ago on the resilience or the interdependency between energy and telecoms networks. And we found that if there was an outage in the energy network within 8 hours, and it degrades almost to start with, the telecoms network will also not be available because of the either no battery availability or mobile battery cells run out. So the communications network is critical because you need to be able to communicate for emergency services. You need to be able to tell people if you're safe or if you need help. So actually the energy system going down is not the major problem then. It becomes that you cannot communicate and resolve the energy network going down. So these sorts of interdependencies aren't obvious until you actually model or you do some examination of these interdependencies.
Thank you, Liz, Rick, Igor. 15 years ago, Joe McClelland was with us. 15, 14, 13, 12 years ago and going forward. About 7 or 8 years ago, we realized that just raising the issue and crying out loud is not enough. I mean, all the problems, the complexity of the modern world and the interdependencies were well known to all of you in the room. And we decided that we need to shift gears and come up with solutions. And my next question is to the audience. And this question explores the role of advanced technologies in improving the precision and responsiveness of resilience metrics, moving beyond static indicators to real-time monitoring and assessment. And the question that I present, let me ask a question, is how can we integrate real-time data and technologies such as IoT or AI into resilience measurement frameworks to ensure a more dynamic and adaptive approach? You go first. Oh, you have a question. Okay. So first, who wants to tackle that question? How can we integrate real-time data and technology such as IoT or AI? I'll give a hint. It starts with a G.
Yes, hello, Itai Sassoon from Commugen. I think the answer to what you're asking is, first of all, to start small, right? We are working with many organizations that are doing exactly what you're saying, starting to move from, let's say, qualitative risk management to KRI-based, right? To measure some key risk indicators. And in many aspects, you need to start to walk before you're starting to run, right? First of all, say, what are those key risk indicators? Then let's say, let's take one of them and automate it. After we've automated one, let's use AI for another one. So it has to be something gradual. I'm seeing many organizations saying, we are working in spreadsheets, and now you're speaking about AI with me, I'm not there. So I think the answer is one step at a time, and this is definitely something that is coming up, but I think will take another few years for, I don't know, the 99% of organizations.
Can you pass on the mic?
I have a walk.
Oh, Chris, yes.
Well, I have a question from the audience.
Hi, if it's Caroline.
Thank you.
Lee,
Hi, everybody. Caroline Field. Work at PA Consulting as a partner in National Resilience and visiting professor at Loughborough University. And this is a topic close to my heart. Just a very quick comment and then a question. So I think, you know, what you've been talking about in terms of maturity models and systems models are all really great. And I think maturity models are a good start, but I think system modeling is at the heart of really understanding resilience, as Igor mentioned. I think the challenge that we have is that a lot of clients don't want to spend that time really understanding because of the lack of systems thinking. And I think you've mentioned a lot about metrics and data. And I think ultimately we need to be able to provide a business model for investing in resilience and be able to show the value in numerical terms for people to want to invest. So my question is, how have you taken the kind of metrics and the approaches that you've spoken about and turned that into an actual business case that provides the evidence for governments or clients to invest in resilience? Thank you.
This is a really important question, Caroline. As I mentioned, I'm trying to bring resilience in what government does, and I'm part of multiple committees, and now I'm part of national committee that developing cyber physical infrastructure resilience strategy. The problem is exactly as you said, people don't see business value in investing in ability to recover, even though it's kind of beats me, right? Because we invest money in buying down risk after risk, like this gentleman said. We start with one risk and we go to another risk and then we run out of money and stop. While if you look at system approaches, you really understand this pathway for collapse, right? And importance of doing that, I actually just published a paper about collapse of Bronze Age civilization. And what happened is that this civilization existed for millennia, and they collapsed like Egyptians, you know, Macedonia, Tutsis, and they collapsed in the time frame of 50 years. We work with top archaeologists who are doing that, and we argue that collapse happened because of compounding threats. When a couple of threats happen, this civilization collapse, even though if we try to collapse them, it's actually we use stress testing methodology to do that. If you try to collapse them altogether, it's not happening. And what we notice is that collapse happened with not necessarily like Egyptian or Babylonians of the ancient world, but rather with small but connected countries. And think about Israel or Ukraine, Russia now. It's exactly a situation when a couple of small countries may collapse in this cascade to the whole world. But back to your question, for me, this is like shows business value. Historically, all wars started with something that it shouldn't start the war, but that was beginning of cascading failure in diplomatic system and social system. Yeah, let me stop here.
Just a very quick add.
Rick, 1 minute.
Yeah, okay, just a very quick add. And I think building on this bit about walking before we run sometimes, and Caroline, I think is a really key question. Again, when I'm thinking about organizations, this business case is really difficult. And when you talk about general maturity levels or recovery capabilities, it doesn't mean anything. If you set a target for the resilience, and this is a risk appetite decision for business, right? So if, let's say I'm a hospital as an organization, and I decide in operations dimension, the availability of critical care beds is important from a resilience perspective. If I decide to set a target that I normally want to operate between 70 to 80% capacity, and I never want to exceed 98% capacity, then I've got some understanding of what I'm trying to achieve. And then I can, through stress testing, understand whether I can achieve it under what conditions, and if I can't achieve it, then I have an investment decision. So I think it's going through that process.
Well, just very, very quickly. Watch out for a report we're doing on what does it mean to do systems thinking in the built environment. So actually, we don't understand systems thinking, even though people have been talking about it for decades. Okay, so systems thinking is out there. The second thing is in our United Nations principles, we actually set out some business cases. So we had a whole section on the economic value of it. And there are really good examples where there's been some sort of more major incident, and when they've recovered from the breakdown, they've actually recovered and used different materials to actually be appropriate for the future climate expectations and future demand expectations. So it's about taking opportunities, I think, to recover as well. No more time left.
Anna, while you're busy typing, I'm taking another minute. The gentleman with the gentleman with the red tie. Hey, I am the moderator.
Behind you.
Gentleman with the red tie, please.
Thank you. My name is Ashutosh Shastri. I run an energy strategy consulting firm. And to answer your question about IoT and the use of AI, I would challenge the notion that, systems thinking is not well appreciated, because actually, in a lot of, industrial, where AI is being deployed, at that scale of those industries, I think they employ a whole lot of engineers. They have an appreciation for systems thinking. I think where the problem lies is in the sharing of the data. And there is a legislation around data, because these industries, electricity and gas industries, are the most documented industries, as it were. There are 8,760 hours in a year. There is a peak demand for every half hour. There's a price for every half hour. That data is available going 20 years back in this country, right? Where is the incentive, and who has the incentive to go back to that data and actually use that to kind of say, okay, based on that, here is my predictive modeling. I mean, for example, what is the likelihood of a wind speed on an average in the second half of February? Is a answer that it's a question that can be answered. The question is, who's going to put together that data, and for whom, and who's going to pay? I think that's where the problem lies. The solution for that, perhaps, is not to try and boil the ocean, but say concentrate the problem at the bulk level, at the high voltage, medium voltage level, see where you go. And then once you've understood what the challenges are in that space, expand it to the distribution level, because that's where you will get a scale up in terms of the number of end users, consumers, etc. Your data requirements will also perhaps multiply manyfold. So that's a thought to your question.
I'll leave that as a comment, because in light of the pressing schedule, please.
I can see the time. Nick Morgan from PwC's Crisis and Resilience team. And I've sort of forgotten where this comment came from, but I was just wanted to raise my hand to say, on the KRIs, the Key Resilience Indicators piece, we often see huge value in identifying the proxy indicators, things that are indicative of the KRI you actually want to measure. And they can often be a little bit easier to identify proxy indicators than direct indicators. It's probably a comment rather than a question, but I can see the time as well.
Okay.
Thank you.
Go ahead. You will.
Okay. I think this is a question for anyone on the panel.
What's your name?
My name is Pooja, and I'm a PhD researcher under Washington. So that's a big deal.
That's a big deal for Washington.
Not really. But he actually is very supportive of modeling uncertainty. And I just want to say that there are several mathematical models that are increasingly being used, and it could be for yourself, to inform decisions in a variety of sectors. So from flooding to energy management, from UK government decisions to EU policy level. So one of the challenges faced in using model outputs, say for policy decisions, is that models are conditional on many uncertain assumptions, right? You mentioned that there's a lot of uncertainty around systems, drivers, and properties, data gaps, errors, and simplifying assumptions. So really the question is that how do you handle uncertainty in infrastructure systems modeling? So really modeling uncertainty is probably the core question. It's broad, but there is some level of specificity. Thanks.
Igor?
Yeah, this is when I was young, when I was a PhD student, I studied in Carnegie Mellon under Granger Morgan, who is the god of uncertainty. And at that point, we were fascinated by Monte Carlo. We can put in Monte Carlo everything as distribution and connect them, and it was beautiful. The problem is that, remember early days of COVID, every day we have new models and new models with new predictions. And when we were in 2022 and new studies new strains started, like Omicron versus Delta, all of a sudden, all models predicted that incidence goes up. Why? Because we calibrated model based on Delta and new process started. So when you're in crisis, you don't understand what's happening, and all models are not working. And my experience with COVID is that ability to do stress testing and ability to think about in a threat agnostic way would allow you to select course of action that at least leads you in the right direction. And this is why we need to think about recovery pathway, like our body design. We have only few recovery pathway built in us by evolution. You have immune system, you have some redundancy, like 2 arms, but not 10 arms, right? But insects have 10 arms because their space of survival requires them to have 10 arms. But for human beings, only 2. So we need to think about crisis and emergency situation from point of view of recovery. And for me, that's the main nature of resilience. And uncertainty will come in ability to select the right recovery pathways, rather than like crunching numbers from Monte Carlos.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think when we're talking about modeling here, there's not a precise model that's going to give you a precise answer. Resilience is actually all about asking the what if questions and the nested what if questions and what if and what if. So it's like multiple repeats of that what if. So you're using a model to help understand what that might look like and what the outcomes might be from the model. But the model's only ever as good as what you put into it, the questions you ask around it, and the challenges you give it. Otherwise, what comes out of it is not going to be particularly useful.
Liz,
yes, of course, quickly, yeah.
Concluding comment?
Of course, the distributions of some of the data that goes into models are often Gaussian. The world is not often Gaussian, it's more Pareto in general. So how do we change our models to use different distributions? The other thing I would mention is about the fact that multi-hazards are existing far more today than they ever were. So conditional probabilities are much more important. So if we already have had one disaster and then we have another threat or vulnerability created, and then we have another cyber attack or something like this, the likelihood of you failing is just completely different from it in isolation. So multiple and multi-hazards are much bigger. No, but I mean, I'll have a look. I'll have a chat.
Thank you, audience. Thank you, panelists. It's been extremely informative and probably the longest panel that we had today.
Well done.
Can we invite the members of panel 7 to come up and get mic'd while we transition over? Thank you very much. Everybody else stand up and stretch. A little micro break. Go ahead and start that.
By 2035, all electricity in America is going to be generated by clean energy.
A major heat wave in California is pushing the state's power grid to its absolute limits.
4 minutes and 37 seconds. That's how close Texas was from a total power grid collapse.
American officials are scrambling to make sure potential weaknesses in the software used to operate American infrastructure have not been penetrated by Chinese and Russian hostile actors.
Increase of renewables on our grid,
which, provide tremendous benefit, but also the security risks that the grid is facing, both physical and cyber. Those are the risks that we have to pay attention to.
A sustainable future for infrastructure is finding the correct balance between carbon-free and resilience.
Resilience needs to be profitable enough that in the boardrooms and the C-suites of corporations, they will be driven to continually invest in expanding and evolving resilience measures.
Yeah. All right, so we get. Just questioning whether. Where's the thing? All right. Lee, let's go. Let's go. Let's go. All right. Thanks, everybody. Can I ask everyone to grab your seats? We're gonna the final panel of the day. This is panel 7. What does good public policy look like in making impactful resilience investments? I'll turn it over to our Stephen, our moderator. Stephen. Hey, everybody. Yeah. Right.
Am I on? Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thanks very much. It's been a fascinating day. I'm sure you'll agree. We are up last. I know there's a fabulous dinner awaiting everyone, but we'll absolutely try and make it worth the wait and keep the fascination and the interest flowing. We've got a really tremendous panel to finish with today for the first day of this conference. And I think we've heard some really great detail about resilience and about policy and about the kind of challenges that face nation states, companies, national grids, the environment, and the international community. What we're going to look a little in this final session is how some of the expertise and knowledge that we've heard about today can actually inform policy, and what does that policy actually look like. And I think the great thing about this panel is that we have people from different walks of life, both involved in the shaping of policy around resilience, considering resilience and risk factors themselves, but also in the implementation of that policy. And I'm really keen to hear a little bit from all of you about what does that look like, and also how do we join the dots? How do we join the dots between some of the great research that goes on in establishments such as this, where we are today, and how do we take that all the way through to public policy, and then also to some degree to public understanding and public reassurance. My name's Stephen Kahn. I'm the executive editor of a publication called The Conversation. For those of you that don't know about The Conversation, it is an international project that brings together academics and journalists. It writes about the news, we run podcasts about the news and events, but we also analyze research as it's published, but very much aimed at the general public, but that is also reaching policymakers as well, so hopefully relevant to the discussion that we're going to have here. And we were actually founded in Melbourne, Australia, so in recognition of that, I thought maybe we'd come to Jill, first of all, who I know has rich experience in the policy realm there in Australia.
Yes, thank you. Jill Savage, thanks to EIS Council and Imperial for the invitation to be here. Thanks also to the Australian Risk Policy Institute for their support in getting here, which is a little bit of a challenge. I've come from Canberra via Sydney, Singapore, into London. At this minute, I think it's about 2 a.m. in my head. So if I stop suddenly, just give me a nudge, and I'll start up again. I have a background in public policy and programs, working in and to government in Australia, and recently have been involved in national preparedness with the Department of Defence, and currently working with organisations such as the Professional Association for the Fire and Emergency Management Commissioners in Australia. And I guess we're in a really interesting phase. We talk about, or at least I talk about, concurrent, consecutive and compounding events. We have an all hazards approach to that. Mostly, I guess, people in Australia would be aware of the natural hazards, natural disasters that we're experiencing, something like 242 major weather events in the last year, impacting about 81 local government areas. For those who don't know, we have 3 levels of government: local government, state, territory government, and the federal government. So resilience is a really big thing on the agenda, and I guess for me it doesn't, it's not embedded in local communities. It is about preparing to respond to the next thing, whatever that might be, which I think is quite limiting for us. There isn't an agency within the federal bureaucracy that doesn't have a resilience task force. I think that kind of gives you a sense of the problem. They're looking at it from a very sectoral perspective. If they come together, it's usually under that umbrella of preparedness. And it's also a closed conversation as well. So it turns into a national security, a classified conversation that excludes a lot of people. So what's happening in Australia is that it's probably fair to say that people are feeling a little bit let down. And so local communities are starting to focus at ground level resilience. So that's aspects around social cohesion, fit for purpose, social and physical infrastructure, the difference between the two, environment protection and conservation, they are different, and economic prosperity. So there's some really interesting work around the resilience that the South Australian government is doing, and it's quite leading the way in terms of resilient communities. And you know, there's this, it's not kind of surprising, but when communities have agency, when they have influence, and they're able to set their own direction, it really does bring the community together, and we've seen this in a whole range of different aspects. So, you know, it's quite a key, but I think we need to go local. I think, which is a problem for the federal government. They fund a lot of things. The state governments don't like them going local. You know, there's kind of this power struggle that goes on. But local, tailored, and you know, quite empowering, I think, is, you know, the elements. For that to happen, policymakers need to be brave, and they need to be thinking differently. And some of the work that we're doing within ARPI, Australian Risk Policy Institute, is around different frameworks. Ivan mentioned the strategic risk policy framework that we've developed and are modelling. So, you know, there's a lot in that, but I think sometimes you just have to let go and let others in the right place grab it and do something with it.
Thanks, Jill. Itai, would you care to come in and give us your perspectives on what does good public policy look like in this sense?
Yes.
And by the way, for anyone that doesn't know and hasn't read the notes, Itai is actually a black belt in judo, so whatever he says, I'm on board with.
We agree with that one. Yeah.
No, thank you. First of all, it's great to be here. Thank you, AIS and Imperial, for having us today. My name is Itai Sassoon, CEO of Commugen, and what we are doing is helping enterprises and organizations to automate cybersecurity risk management, compliance, and governance. And the reason to that is that we are finding many organizations struggling with very repetitive, very manual, very cumbersome tasks when it comes to risk management on one hand, or to governance, meaning to do what they've decided to do, right? And it connects very much to public policies, because we are meeting organizations one step after the public policy was decided, was released, was enacted. Then organizations are saying, well, what should I do now? How do I make sure that I'm complying with regulation? And I've got to say, all of them are saying, I don't want just to tick the box. I want to really improve. I don't want just to do something just for the sake of doing it, right? And a lot of organizations are struggling with this. And I think that when we are thinking about good public policy, we have to think about this, right? And there were a lot of discussions in the last panel about resilience and the ISO standards. What I'm seeing, at least from my perspective, is that most organizations are not embedding a full resilience program, right? And we can ask, why is that, right? Why most organizations don't have systems for that, don't have teams that will do that. And what we are seeing is that where there is a regulation that mandates business continuity planning and resilience planning, we are seeing investments. In other places where there are no regulations, most organizations are not investing in this. So this is one perspective, right? To use sticks. Another perspective might be to use carrots, right? To use incentives, to give tools, to help organizations to do that, right? And I think this is what I'm bringing today, and looking forward to hear what the other panelists has to say.
Craig, would you like to introduce yourself and perhaps tell us as a state representative a little bit about how you're thinking about public policy within this area of risk and resilience?
Okay. Well, thanks for having me here. Kind of a unique background compared to a lot of you folks who are the smart scientist type and things like that. My background before that kind of formed, I think, the kind of legislator I am, a retired military guy of 22 years, served in both the Marine Corps and the Air Force, retired as a colonel, and then during that time, I was experienced in different countries, led humanitarian missions to central Mexico, where they have a lot of places without any power, where they have brownouts, blackouts. I also work a lot extensively with some groups in South Africa with the same thing. They have scheduled brownouts. They have apps for their scheduled brownouts for meetings, and then unscheduled blackouts on regular occurrences. So those things I think helped kind of form what kind of legislator I've become from seeing those sides, spending a lot of time outside the country to see what we have or what we could have. I'm a legislator late in life, so don't hold being a politician against me. It was a late in life decision. So the committees I serve on that got me interested in this, along with having a military background on threats to our grid systems and things like that and infrastructure. I'm actually on a military and public safety, infrastructure, and environmental. So all of those kind of overlap with each other. And what I do rely on for good public policy, I think most of us rely on, is not only coming to things like this with experts, because I'm definitely not the expert in this realm. I have experiences, but not the expertise. And so we try to take the emotion out of it. We try to say, hey, this is what we need. Obviously, we want to do that with be responsible, with respect and honor, and do things the right way. And we try to give those agencies when we put public policy into place, we want to do it so an agency can take that without too much overreach or rule making by these agencies, and put some guardrails on that. But to do it in a way that takes a lot of things into account. One of the problems that we've had, at least in our state, is, and you talked about it, moving too fast. Because obviously we all want to be good stewards of the environment and other things, but I think with one of the things that we've talked about today, Indiana is a large manufacturing state. So we have actually a new chip plant that's coming in. We have a lot of information data centers growing. We have Eli Lilly, which is a global pharmaceutical, which is going to have a lot of growth. And in an area, just to take a specific example, where they want to go, each of these facilities would take about 5% of the power available in the grid. And this area currently, at the hot times, peak times, doesn't have very little extra power in their grid. And so you look at these things and say, okay, what do we have? What have we started replacing our energy production with in Indiana? Well, because of overregulation or incentives not to build these facilities, you have a lot of private industry which used to do a lot of the energy production facilities that are not investing, closing those down. And so we're left with a few of those, and then systems, you have the solar, the wind, which are all reliant, and we talked about it today, on weather, whether the wind is blowing or whether it's cold out. Energy storage is an issue. I think we all know that. And so, good or bad, we're actually reopening, I believe, well, set to, and I only know this because our energy providing lobbyist isn't real happy that we're looking at reopening a coal-fired plant. Because Midwest, we are the, good or bad, the Saudi Arabia of coal, in that part of the world. And one thing, and I know I'm probably not the popular guy for saying this, but the emissions from coal plants are about as clean as natural gas these days. So, it's the truth. And so I think sometimes we've created our own issues. And so what we're trying to say is, okay, because we deal with lobbyists and then in groups that have strong opinions about things, and I think all those opinions come from a good place. So I'm not anybody's enemy. I'm not against the clean energy because I'm a huge small modular nuclear reactor guy. As a matter of fact, we made legislation to allow the definition of a small reactor to be a little bit larger, so that through regulation they can get through a little quicker based on testing reactors. Because we actually have Rolls-Royce is also in Indianapolis, Indiana, where I'm from. So, and they're the ones making one of the reactors. But so I think when we look at policy, we try to take all those things in, take emotion out of it, see where we need to be, and be reasonable so one thing doesn't hurt the other. Because in an effort to get there too quickly, sometimes we talk about how people can suffer if we don't get to the new place, but at the same time, if we go too quick, we're hurting a lot of folks by going too quick. So that's kind of how I look at policy.
Thank you. Haley, you've just told me that you left your mother in Harrods with your credit card, so I'm guessing you've got a pretty high bar for risk and possibly resilience as well.
You only turned 65 once. It's her birthday.
Would you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, of course. My name is Haley Seipel. I'm the Director for National Security Policy at the Edison Electric Institute. EEI is the organization that represents all of the U.S. investor-owned electric companies. We make up about 80% of the U.S. energy grid. My role is particularly fun, though, because I work on the private side, but I'm responsible for coordinating the electric industry's national security engagement with the federal government, especially some of our partners at DOE. I know Lily sat up here earlier. Caesar is one of the folks that we work with more than anybody. We have a really great relationship. Good public policy to me, I think, has to be forward-looking. I mean, all of the above, first of all, but I think it has to be forward-looking. So many important decisions that we make are very reactive because they're made in a flurry of urgency, or they're made in response to a particular event or a particular person, or they're made to support a particular social or political movement that just fills one blip in time, or they're made piecemeal, a bunch of stopgap policies stacked one on top of the other. A particularly clear example of this for me that I spend a lot of my time thinking about is the supply chain crunch that the US has found itself in, especially critical infrastructure sectors like energy. Right now, we're living the consequences of some politically driven trade and labor policies that were made before I was born or while I was in grad school a long, long time ago. We have managed to pave the way for global and just-in-time supply chains, which at the time I'm sure seemed like a wonderful thing to be able to do. It seems very efficient, but here we've stopped investing in domestic manufacturing, and we've stopped investing and prioritizing those skills in the labor force and in education. So today we've found ourselves at sort of a tipping point where critical supplies are extremely scarce, and lead times for those supplies are 4 and 5 times longer than they used to be. And we've also found ourselves in a heightened geopolitical adversarial environment where I think we're concerned about the US's ability to even purchase the critical supplies that we rely on foreign manufacturers for. It's a really bad situation, and I think it's likely to get worse before it gets better. But we are starting to think now, sort of a silver lining, we're starting to think now about the trade policies and the labor policies and the mining and mineral rights policies, all of the things that need to come together for us to start unraveling this mess. So there's a Chinese proverb that's sort of a motto on my team, and it's the best time to plant a tree was 30 years ago. The second best time is today. Most of you have heard my boss say this, I'm sure. But the energy sector is really actively engaged with DOE, with the White House, to find and implement solutions now to this supply chain crisis that very literally creeped up on us over the past couple of years. And surely the takeaway here is not that policymakers should see the future every time. I will defer to Representative Haggard. If he can see the future, I'd love to know. But I don't think that you can. We can, however, prioritize adaptability and truly emphasize the need for policies that continue working well in a variety of different futures. I think we often fall into a trap of of thinking about consideration for the future as a policy-making luxury, maybe, something that is great in an ideal environment, but as soon as there is political urgency or anything happens, it gets thrown out the window and we react. We're very reactive. I don't have a perfect solution to this, but I think there's one really actionable way that we can make forward-looking easier to achieve. And this came up a little bit with the other panelists, but I think you bring stakeholders to the table. I think you have to choose not to make big decisions in a vacuum. Bringing folks to the table who are subject matter experts and great thinkers, all of the folks who have different perspectives are going to help you see the future better than just a group of folks who have been working together on the same specific issues for a long time. And I'll give another example that's really near and dear to my heart. So in addition to my role at EEI, I also serve on the Secretariat for an organization called the Electricity Subsector Coordinating Council, the ESCC. This is a body of about 30 CEOs from all across the industry that come together with government leadership to really think through and think through implementation of solutions to the biggest national security problems that the US energy grid is facing. We bring together that subject matter expertise, the understanding of the industry and how it operates, the money that the investor owners have, and we bring together the federal perspective that I think has more leeway, certainly knows more of the government levers to pull, but has more leeway to think about society as a whole and the well-being of everyone else in the country as a whole. This is a spectacular partnership. I'm happy to talk more about it with anyone who's interested, but it's also extremely rare. I don't know of any other sectors that have that kind of relationship with the federal government where they bring everyone to the table when there is an emergency.
Thank you. I was actually going to come to you, Jill, because I think in the preparation for this, we talked a little bit about the role of political leadership in shaping new thinking. And clearly Haley's touched on that when talking a bit about the global political environment. And I'd sort of love to get a political perspective on that as well, but maybe Jill, you can come in on that first.
Yeah. Just to follow up on the supply chain issues, we have a very uncertain geostrategic environment, and our relationship with our Pacific neighbours, I describe as we run hot and cold. We're currently running hot because we've realised there's kind of an issue that we didn't notice it was happening. On the supply chain aspect, Australia is very good at exporting natural resources and buying in the products, importing in the products made from those natural resources. We're almost stars at that. And we've realised, again, it's been happening over a long period of time. We manufacture almost nothing. We've realised that's a very difficult position for us to be in. Rather than recreating a car manufacturing sector of the 1970s, which is heavily subsidised, and trust me, people want us to do that, we're looking more strategically at things like critical minerals and moving ourselves up the value chain more. It's this question about what is it that is really important to us, and let's invest in that and let's kind of own that, which I think is it's been a long time coming, but it's a good thing. In terms of the leadership and this political intervention in public policy has also been had a light shine on it. This morning there was a commentary about the UK Post Office. We've had some you know, pretty big disasters in Australia in public policy very recently. You know, we love a royal commission. We've had royal commissions on also almost everything. We have this thing called robo-debt. It's a very catchy title. Just think of people on social security payments who receive a letter generated through a computer system that tells them that they've got a debt of $30,000. Lots of concern, hundreds of these letters went out. You know, people committed suicide. It was a big disaster. Found to be illegal. Found that the advice to government initially wasn't very clear. Then it was clear. And then what you do is that you don't want to hear the message, so you sack the person that gave you the bad news, even though they weren't there at the beginning, but you know, that's a long story. So, you know, for me, brave is really, really, really key. And policymakers don't only have to be brave themselves, they have to learn how to help their boss and their boss's boss be brave. And you know, we talk a lot about leadership, and it's probably a topic that's had more books written on it than anything else. But we still don't know what it is. We still can't work it out. You know, to me, it comes back to values, and it comes back to saying what you mean and doing what you say. And I think if we, you know, get as basic as that in a more widespread way, we'll start developing good public policy in Australia.
Craig, how do we deliver on good public policy amid this sort of febrile culture war?
Well, you know, it is tough. I always said, besides taking emotion out of it, I think when you make good public policy, you have to take ideology out of it too. And that's one of the things to be honest with you, I really can't stand. A lot of people in my own party say, well, you don't like your party. It's like, well, no, I do like my party, and I like, you know, we fight it out during the campaign, but after that, and you know, this isn't an isolationist thing, but you know, we're in our place, you know, we're Americans first. What I say that is that we're not this party or that party. We should do what's for the good of the folks that we're elected to represent. The groups that you do like, don't like, trust me, there's a lot of groups that personally I don't like, but they still have the right to do what they want, you know, what our Constitution says they can do. So I think the biggest part of it is trying to look past all of that and to say what's better for the people of this state or this country versus what do I believe. Because I see a lot of people putting what they believe in over what the constituents they represent, what is better for them. And that's a tough thing right now because you do have such an emotionally charged thing. Now at our state level, not like the national level, I would say, and people are surprised by this, but actually last year, and it's about the same average each year, we pass about 92-ish% of our legislation bipartisan, which you don't hear, you know, a lot. You hear, you have those social issues that, you know, we'll always be out there and fight about, and I let other people carry those flags. I don't get involved in that stuff. But, you know, and people will get up there and make their speeches and, you know, this guy and that guy, but then afterwards you're going to the bar together kind of thing. So behind the scenes, I think, at least in certain parts of the country, you do have that attitude that we need to put all the emotional stuff, this belief or that belief to the side and say, hey, what's better to accomplish this mission or goal? I kind of tend to put everything into a military mission, but here's our goal. And a lot of times, we have different ways to get there, and every decision you make actually is probably not the best. Somebody's going to get hurt, but then stand up. Don't be afraid to make a decision that's right because you might look bad in the newspaper or whatever, because there are people that won't do that. They want to make that decision that is not the best decision because they don't want to stand up and take the heat. Well, that's why you're elected. Stand up and take the heat and make the right decision.
And just quickly, Itai, I know you've got considerable experience of this in the Israeli context. I wonder if you could just, we are short of time, I'm afraid, and you know, everyone's keen to get on, but I wonder if you could just quickly pick up on that point as well.
Yeah, so I definitely agree with Craig here, right? I think in many cases, people are not making the right decision because of, you know, political thoughts. It can be also inside an organization, right? It doesn't have to be as a legislator, right? And I think that one of the ways to avoid those biases in many places is to keep things simple, right? And to make sure, and I think this is something that was talked about earlier in the day, is to focus on the values, right? What are we trying to achieve as a society, as an organization, as, I don't know, we are working a lot with critical infrastructure, right? And I think also talked earlier about insurance being almost something that is irrelevant for critical infrastructure companies, because it doesn't matter if you will get a $10 million check after a month. If you didn't provide energy to the people that trust you, then you failed in your mission, right? So to some extent, I believe that we need to focus on our values, on what we want to achieve, and do it in a way that is aiming, at least, to be simple in order to really make sure we are reaching those values and we are making sure we are delivering on our promises.
Thanks so much. Thanks to all of you here. We are about to go to dinner, but you know who everyone here is. Please do follow up with questions on a one-to-one basis. And do go to theconversation.com, sign up for our newsletters, and search for resilience, because you'll find a lot of special series on the subject. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Our thanks to the panel. We're just going to have a couple of closing comments by Avi and Washington. And then as Craig Haggard said, the important part is after it's all over, you go have a beer together, talk things over a meal. So we'll all be doing that.
According to the agenda, I'm supposed to review the day, and I have multiple pages of notes. I do think it would be good to have a review for today. I recommend adding it to tomorrow morning's activity, because it would not take that long, but any time at all is really too long when we're already over time. So thank you for still being here. It has been an amazing day, an amazing day.
So everything the CEO has said. Thank you very much. Thank you.
We're going to see you tomorrow morning. Sleep well. Please, Oni. Thank you to the AV team that did a wonderful job today. Important.